Hello. So I thought I would make a Greek video, Koine Greek, and this is actually going to be sort of like an introductory type lesson, but I wanted to try a different approach, so it's going to be kind of a halfway mix between introductory stuff and some of it will be way over someone's head if they're just a beginner. So um, the passage that I'm going to look at today here is um, that's actually Luke uh, uh, 8 11 through 15. Um, yeah, we'll look at it in Greek. So maybe some just some introductory things. I'm not assuming that someone watching this will maybe they won't know anything about Greek. So there'll be parts of it that'll be geared towards someone that doesn't know anything about Greek, and then I'm gonna actually probably read the text. I'll probably just try to speed through it fast to not take up so much time in the video. So obviously that won't be as useful to someone who doesn't know any Greek. Um, some introductory things first. So I studied 3 years of Koine Greek in college, and this was it's been like 10 years since I graduated, 11 years since I graduated. Um, and over the years since then, I haven't really improved, but I have kept up with what I learned, so that I'm still about at the same level I was when I graduated. Some things I'm better at now, some things I'm worse at now. So let's see what else. So when it comes to studying dead languages, maybe another little bit. After I graduated, I wanted to learn a living language because I'd spent 3 years studying Koine Greek, a dead language, and so I wanted to learn a living language. I wanted to actually speak in the language, think in the language, which is typically not the way that you study dead languages. That's usually not the goal, and none of the exercises that you do actually push you in that direction, depending on who your professor is and what method. But at the most, it's a very little amount of pushing you towards thinking or producing the language. So I want to, me and monolingual, I felt like, how can I sit there and study a foreign language and not even know what it means to speak a foreign language? So after I graduated, I started studying modern Greek, and I did that for a little bit, but not enough to get beyond the beginning stage where you're basically just using stock phrases that you've memorized, and occasionally putting together some baby sentences. That's pretty well as far as I got with modern Greek. But I ended up switching to Russian, which grammatically has actually quite a bit in common with Koine Greek. There's a lot of grammatical overlap. Maybe a Russian speaker might think, no, they're totally different. But compared to English, there's a lot of overlap. They both use cases. For the most part, they use the same cases. The cases have similar functions in Russian versus in Koine Greek. And actually, because of the conjugation, the cases can make Russian a little bit more similar than modern Greek to Koine Greek, just because modern Greek does not do nearly as much conjugating. Anyway, I don't want to end up talking about that too much. I will just say, though, if someone wanted to learn modern Greek, learning modern Greek is actually very helpful for learning Koine Greek or even ancient Greek, because there are quite a bit of similarities. So there are similarities with the conjugation, similarities with even the vocabulary holds quite a bit the same. So yeah, there's some about that. As far as other languages I've studied, just who is this random YouTube guy that's talking about languages? I lived in Belgium when I was a little kid, so I learned a little bit of French, but I don't even remember anything because I was fairly young when I moved back to the U.S. I studied a year of German in high school, then a semester of Latin. Then in college, I studied Hebrew. I've actually studied Hebrew on a few different occasions. And when recounting it recently with a friend, I realized every time I try to study Hebrew, my life falls apart. So every time I've tried to study Hebrew, I haven't been able to progress very far because everything in my life just got really crazy and I had to stop studying. But I've studied both biblical, ancient Hebrew, as well as modern Hebrew. And again, there's a lot of overlap there. And even more overlap probably because modern Hebrew really is an attempt to resurrect the dead language, ancient Hebrew. So what else? As I mentioned, I've studied Greek, I've studied Russian, I've studied a lot of also language theory and linguistics and stuff like that. So yeah. One more thing that needs to be said before I actually start. So if you are to study, Usually people who study Koine Greek are studying through some kind of a Christian perspective, whether through a church or a seminary or university, maybe even at your church. One of the times I studied Hebrew was actually with my church informally. The pastor offered Hebrew. So the other way is if you're studying in like a classical setting where you're trying to study classical Greek. And in those types of settings, in the West, meaning, in the US especially, and I think this is also true in Europe, they use a pronunciation that is different from the pronunciation used in modern Greek. This was contrived, not meaning that with like negative connotations, but it was contrived by, if I have his name right, it's been a while since I looked, I'm pretty sure it was Erasmus who did it. And it was roughly, I don't know, 1300, 1700, somewhere within that like ballpark. Because at that time, people who wanted to study Greek would use the modern Greek pronunciation of the day. And it was well known that the modern Greek pronunciation was not the same as the ancient Greek pronunciation. So they made some attempt to reform Greek pronunciation to get back to the way it used to be pronounced. That involves some research, some like methodical approaches, and just some flat out guesswork, comparing things in poetry and other places where you should know what things are supposed to sound like. Probably they compared with transliterations in other languages where the sound was maybe they were more certain of the way it should have sounded. So that's usually what's taught from the Western perspective, whether you're trying to study classical Greek formally or whether you're trying to study from a church or a seminary. The reason I say all that is because I prefer to try to use the modern Greek pronunciation. So when I read, I'm going to be using the modern Greek pronunciation, and there's various reasons for this. And basically, the short thing is, though, neither pronunciation is correct. It's very obvious when you start to study that neither pronunciation is perfect. But I prefer using the pronunciation that, to me, the contrived pronunciation just doesn't feel, it feels robotic. It doesn't feel like a real language. It doesn't flow off the tongue like a real language, whereas the modern Greek pronunciation does feel natural when you try to speak it. The second issue is, one benefit to studying Koine Greek is you kind of have a leg up on studying modern Greek because a lot of the vocabulary is the same and a decent amount of the grammar is the same, although there are major changes in the grammar. But yeah, so for me, the modern pronunciation is preferred. However, since I began by studying 3 years worth of the older pronunciation, and I actually only studied modern Greek for like a year, and then that was a long time ago. I haven't been focusing on it very much. My pronunciation is probably going to be actually a mix between the two. I won't go over the alphabet. There's plenty of videos on the alphabet, and you can find those or just look in a book. So yeah, let me go ahead and read this real quick. I'm going to start by, so this is going to be attempts to be kind of a little Bible study, where the goal is to actually study the word in Greek. One of the issues with studying Greek and Hebrew is to get to a level of proficiency where you can actually use it for Bible study, which is usually the purpose. And for anybody that would be interested in my video, that's going to be usually the purpose. In all honesty, it takes a lot of work, like years and years of very hard work, before you can get to a point where you can actually use it comfortably and have strong confidence, like to where you can just pick it up in Greek and read it, for example. So this is going to be kind of a way that you can, there's some things that you can do to like incorporate it, where you still study the Bible as you're studying the language. So I'm going to kind of try to attempt to do that. And let's see, maybe one more introductory note. I don't know how long this is already, but just one more introductory note for someone who isn't familiar with, maybe you're not familiar with the languages of the Bible. So the Old Testament was originally written in Hebrew, with small portions of it written in Aramaic, which is a language very similar to Hebrew. The New Testament was originally written in Greek. Some scholars say parts of it were written in Hebrew, whatever. I personally believe it was all originally written in Greek. That's going to be into historical. As far as like actual manuscripts that we have, they're all in Greek. And so for all practical purposes, the New Testament was originally written in Greek. And Greek is also useful for much of the early church fathers, so early church leaders. They're just called early church fathers. But the early leaders in the church, most of their works are written in Greek, Koine Greek of the same period of Greek, as well as a translation of the Old Testament known as the Septuagint into Greek that was very well known and well used by Jesus as well as his disciples and the early church. From what I know, from what other scholars and researchers have said, they typically used, but they very frequently used the Septuagint. I don't know, like percentage wise, probably if you spoke Hebrew, you might have used the Hebrew text, but a lot of them maybe didn't or didn't as well. So a lot of them used the Greek Septuagint as their main source of the Old Testament, like for personal study. Yeah. Oh, and then sorry, the one more thing that I was actually trying to get to. So the New Testament, when you read the Bible in English, the whole thing is translated as one book by translators who intentionally try to make it feel the same. So you can buy translations that are intended to be easier to read. You can buy translations that are written in a little more of a difficult reading style. And if you actually read the Bible in the original languages, there are huge differences in reading level between the certain books, the certain authors, even the certain genres. So, but if we're dealing with the New Testament, the focus more is on the different authors had different writing styles. So Luke is not a place I would normally start. I happened to start here because I wanted to start with a parable. I actually I already did all my research on this and then realized I accidentally got the explanation of the parable instead of the parable. I had already done a lot of work, so I stuck with it. But I wanted to try to pick something a little more concrete. But Luke often uses just very difficult writing style that if you were thinking of it in English, it would be more like a university research paper, college level writing style with all the fancy grammar that you would expect to see in a college paper, versus something written for like a children's book, which is more of John's writing style. And the writing styles fall anywhere in between. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and read this in English first, since the point is to try to study the Bible. So this was Luke chapter 8, verses 11 through 14. Is it 14? 15. This is the meaning of the parable. The seed is the word of God. Those along the path are the ones who hear, and then the devil comes and takes away the word from their hearts, so that they may not believe and be saved. Those on the rock are the ones who receive the word with joy when they hear it, but they have no root. They believe for a while, but in the time of testing they fall away. The seed that fell among thorns stands for those who hear, but as they go on their way, they are choked by life's worries, riches and pleasures, and they do not mature. But the seed on good soil stands for those with a noble and good heart, who hear the word, retain it, and by persevering produce a crop. So that's the text that we're going to look at. Now I'll read it in Greek. Again, if this is all Greek to you, just bear with me or just skip 20 seconds, 30 seconds, whatever in the video. So, estin de hafti ki perevali, ha sporas estin ha logas tu theu, ki de paratin hadon isin ki accusantes, ite έρχεται διάβολος και έρει τον λόγον από της καρδίας αυτών. Χίνα μη πιστεύσαντες σωθώσιν, είδε επί της πέτρας, κι όταν ακούσωσιν μετα χαράς, δέχονται τον λόγον και χούτι χρίζαν ουκ έχουσιν, κι προς καιρόν πιστεύουσιν, και εν καιρό πειρασμού αφίστανται, το δε εις τας ακάντας πεσόν, ούτι εισιν κι ακούσαντες, και χυπό μεριμνών, και πλούτου, και δανών του βίου, παρεφόμενοι, συμπήγανται, και ου τελεσφορούσιν, το δε εν τη καλή γη. utiisin, hitenes, en cardia, kali, ke agathi, accusantes ton logon, katehusin, ke karpafarusin, en hippomani. Okay, that was that. So now I went ahead and prepared this ahead of time because my typing ability in Greek is really sad, and it takes me a long time to type in Greek. So here was the first sentence. We're probably not actually going to make it through all sentences because this video is going to just end up way too long. If I try that, it's already going to end up being pretty long anyway. So once again, reading one more time, the first sentence. Estin de hafti hypervali asporas estin halogas tu theu. And so I broke these down word by word. I'll read it real quick. It's going to be a little bit boring, but just to show what they are. So our first word, estin, is the verb. The root form of the verb is Imme. I don't know if you can see. Yeah, I think you can see my mouse. So Imme. And Greek is heavily conjugated, so this verb conjugates. It is present, indicative, third person singular. And a plug for, maybe give a few plugs for some of my resources. I use this book. I don't like his definitions, so I never use his definitions because that sounds a little weird to say that, but sometimes in the modern times they try to give funky definitions for words when it's more helpful to give like a base core definition, which is usually what you find like the lexicon that's in the back of my Greek New Testament, for example. I usually just use those definitions. However, this is incredibly useful for conjugating words, which is completely necessary for trying to understand the structure and flow of a sentence. So I use that heavily, especially now that I haven't been studying a lot for the past like 10 years. That's one of the things that has faded a lot. And yeah, so what this is telling you is, so the verb Imme means to be. It's a verb, as I said, and it is present indicative third person singular. So what that means is the verb is to be, and to be is actually a nice one because it's one of the few words in English that conjugates in English. So the word is be, and our infinitive form in English is to be. That's how we make infinitive, by adding the word to. Actually, let's see, what's the infinitive in Greek? I feel like it's isin, but I'm not sure. Like, don't quote me on that. I'd have to look it up, and I didn't do that ahead of time. So there is an infinitive form in Greek, and it is neither of these two forms. In Greek, the dictionary form for verbs is the first person singular form. That's not the full conjugation, but just saying it's first person and it's singular. Whereas in Greek we use in English we use the infinitive. Infinitive form does not take a subject. It's not the form of a verb that can take a subject. You can't say he to be. To be can't take a subject when you use it that way. Imme would be the equivalent of the English word am. So I am, or is that correct? Ego imme. That's sort of true, but actually in English it would be, we use I am and we use he is. So it's just, sorry, no. Yeah, it would be I am, not he is. I am. He is what we have over here. So it's third person singular, estin. So if you want to say he is, you say estin. If you want to say I am, you would say imme. The other parts of this verb conjugation get pretty complicated. And there's one that, so Mounts in the book that I just showed you, he actually lists this, I think, as present active indicative, but I remember memorizing it as present indicative without the active or passive. Let's see if I remember the names of those. So I think it's, I should have looked that up. I'm going to mess it up if I try. So third person, that's person. Singular, that's number. Indicative, that's mood. So it should be tense voice. I think tense voice. So here's one down here. No, that's not it. This one. Present, passive, indicative, third person singular. You have tense. So you have different options there. It could be present, it could be past, it could be future, it could be aorist, which is something that you would have to be explained later, but it could be aorist, it could be perfect. So most of those we actually have in English except for aorist, and perfect isn't exactly the same, but we more or less have at least similar names in English. We have voice in English. In English, though, tense. Tense in English is often done by, there's differences. In English, it's often done by like combining words together. That's often how we change the verb form. It's not always, but it's often. So to be versus am. You don't usually just say be. Maybe be could count as the infinitive, but you usually say to be. I don't know if be actually counts as an infinitive by itself in English. But in Greek, you rarely combine words together to form a different type of verb. It can happen, but it's much more frequent that you just change the form of the word. Whereas in English, it's very rare that you change the form of the verb. In Greek, it's very common. And most of Greek students' difficulty is learning all the different conjugations, because nouns also conjugate. So anyway, estin, you have tense. Indicative is mood, and that's a lot harder to explain, and that would be probably better, I think, for later on for studies. But indicative is just like it's just making a statement. And comparisons in English, there's some grammatical comparisons, but they're going to be not stuff that people think about as regularly on like grammar concepts that you don't think about on a regular basis. Maybe they'll be less familiar to like a general audience. So yeah, third person. Third person tells you that this has to take a subject that is a third person. So it can take another subject that is a noun. It can take a subject that is a pronoun that is a third person pronoun. And the singular is telling you that it has to be singular. So for example, a potential subject for estin, but using English words, could be fox. It's a noun, it's singular. It could not be foxes. It's a noun, it's plural. So this would not be the correct form of the verb to go with that subject. Another possibility would be he. He is a pronoun, it's third person, and it's singular. So it could go with estin. But they could not, because that's third person and plural, so that could not go with estin. Or the word I. I is a pronoun and it's singular, but it's first person, so it cannot go with estin. Actually, the word I would go with Imme. Yeah, if I was consistent with my pronunciation, Imme. So that's a little bit of some grammar concepts and what's going on there with the first word. So the first word, estin, just means more or less it's he is, but we don't know whether it's he yet. Maybe there's a subject. The subject might come after, so we don't know. But there's some third person singular subject that goes with this verb meaning is. Okay, next word. The is a conjunction. I may mix up some of these conjunction, particle, interjection. Don't bite my head off. I'm not a professional grammarian, but for the most part, I think I'll get them correct. So this is a conjunction, and it can either convey the idea of but or and. Conjunctions, they connect two clauses. So this is a particular, there's a type of word. This is interesting. So as I mentioned, I study Russian, so sometimes I'm going to make comparisons, and forgive me if you're interested to learn Russian, but Russian and Greek both have this. There's some words that appear second. They have to be the second word in the clause or phrase. I don't know if phrase is correct. It's just second word in the clause. So this is one of those. So the, that's how you pronounce that. The actually, conceptually, if we think about it from an English mindset, it comes before estin, because in English we never put the conjunction after the word that it's a part of that clause. That's really odd for us to think that way. So it would be but he is what we have so far. We have to in English put that conjunction before. Conceptually, it's part of that clause. So the word estin is a part of the clause that is introduced by the word the. The is a conjunction. It introduces a clause. That's pretty typical of conjunctions. So let's see what's next. Hafti. So Hafti is a this is a third person. Sorry. Yeah. Wait, did I have that right? Yes. Okay, this is one that I would have had wrong until I looked it up. So this is a demonstrative pronoun. It's third person singular, and the root word is hutas. You could also say that the root word is hafti, depending on how you want to break them up, because hutas is a masculine version. Maybe you want to keep masculine. How to say this? So then the root form is going to be nominative in case. Then you have feminine singular. Maybe you want nominative feminine singular to be the root word. So if it were genitive feminine singular, you would say the root is the nominative feminine singular version. Maybe you want to say nominative masculine singular is the root for all of the, because there's going to be nominative, there's going to be masculine, feminine, and neuter. Maybe you want to say the masculine one is always the root. It doesn't really matter. It's just more your preference of how you choose to break down the words. I'm sure there's a historical tradition. I would have probably picked hafti to be the root form, because conceptually that makes more sense to me. But in the one that I looked at, the book that I was using for parsing, he chose to use hutas as the masculine form as the root form, and I chose to just stick with the way he was doing it because it makes it simpler for me when I was making out this little chart here. So let's see. I don't have a lot of space, but right here. So in Greek, they have their nouns conjugate, and this is a pronoun. The pronouns also conjugate. All of the nouny type words conjugate. I don't know if there's a word I think that means that, and I can't think of what the word is that I want, but so nouns, adjectives, any word that's acting kind of like a noun, those conjugate. And in Greek there are 4. In Koine Greek, in the different eras of Greek, there are some different numbers for the amounts of conjugations of nouns. But in Koine Greek there are 4, and they are nominative. Misspelled. Forgive me if I misspelled. I always forget where the A's and the I's go in these. Genitive, dative, and and accusative. So there's the 4 conjugations, and it's going to be easiest to, so each one of these is going to have, so let's go back to nouns. Each noun will have a gender, so feminine, neuter, or masculine, and a number, singular or plural, and then the case, which is going to be nominative, genitive, dative, or accusative. And those are all of this like conjugation stuff is just telling you how the word fits in with the rest of the clause or the rest of the sentence or the rest of the phrase. The words are building together into this cohesive whole, right? That's how language works. And so hafti, in this case, is nominative, feminine, singular. Well, what does that mean? As far as what it's referring to in reality, like the concept behind it, basically it means like this one, this person, whatever. It's this, but often in Greek I don't know if we do the same in English. Maybe we do. So it's just the idea of this. Often it's referring to a person, this person or this thing. And so if it is referring to a person, it would have to be a female person. It would have to be one person as opposed to many people, because it's feminine, it's singular. If it's referring to an object or a thing, then whatever the actual thing is that it's referring to, the normal word that's used to refer to that thing instead of the pronoun, like say a dog, cat, whatever it is it's referring to, the grammatical form of that word would have to be feminine. It should be a feminine word if it's referring to a thing other than a human. If it's referring to a human, then it should be feminine because, well, the person is feminine. So if that makes sense. It's also going to tell you that as far as the adjectives that might go with this word are also going to be feminine. The participles that might go with this word are also going to be feminine. The articles that might go with this word are also going to be feminine. And singular actually as well. Singular will apply to all of those. And for all of what I just mentioned, nominative will also apply to those for the last couple, as far as which adjective, article, or participle would go with this word. Those are all going to be nominative, feminine, singular to help show that they go together. The reason that you choose nominative tells you how the noun fits with the verb. So there are four, back to these, there are four cases: nominative, genitive, dative, accusative. I shouldn't just say it's how it fits with the verb, it's how it fits with the verb or whatever word it might be going with instead of a verb. And for the nominative case, the tricky thing about language is there's always exceptions to rules, so don't, a lot of what I say won't, there's going to be exceptions. It won't like be perfect. There'll be times when what I said wasn't the complete accurate description of the reality, and that's just kind of language study. It just works that languages work that way. They always do, unless you're studying Esperanto, which was made up by humans to avoid that. So nominative is typically the base idea here is that it is the subject of the verb, the subject of the clause, the subject of the sentence. It is the subject of the verb. Most of the time, that's what it's. If it's a nominative, that's the role that it's playing. Another possibility is predicate nominative, which I'm not sure what that's called grammatically in other languages or in English, but maybe it's called the same. But that would be like the object of the word is, a being verb, to be. There's a couple other ones too, and I just can't think of them off the top of my head. So, like if I say I am a dog, the first word there in English, the word I, is the subject. Am is the verb. A dog, we don't consider that, at least in the Greek concept. I don't know actually in English, maybe it is called the object, I'm not sure. But if I were using Greek words instead of English words to help explain this concept, it would be called a predicate nominative. Probably the one reason for that is because the form of the word will be in the nominative case and not the accusative case, whereas the accusative case is normally the case for a direct object of a verb. So yeah, short answer, normally the nominative is the subject of the verb. Genitive case normally is the kind of the root idea that you learned. The idea you learned first is possession. And actually we have this in English. I think this is wait, let me actually, I was thinking of the word my with pronouns, but I don't know if that, so I don't know if that's the same. We have something close with the word my, but I don't know if that's actually considered a separate case of the personal pronoun. That's probably just considered a possessive pronoun, something that's just a separate word. At any rate, in English we usually use two words. The typical easy like beginner Greek student translation is to say of him, like it is the dog of him, and or his dog. Oh, his. We do have it. There we go. I thought we did. The word his in English is conveying this genitive idea. So he would be like nominative. His would be like genitive. To him would be dative, except in Greek they just use one word instead of two words, but in English it's best to convey the idea with two words, to him. And because accusative would be him, like he hit him, that would be the form that is the direct object. And that actually fits pretty well with what all of these are, except the difference is in English we only use these forms with like personal pronouns, and that's about it. Greek, every single word has all of these forms. Okay, so there's some Greek grammar. Now this word is this. As I said, it is nominative, so most likely it is a subject or a predicate nominative. So we have estin, de, hafti. So this, but this is, so probably hafti here because I'm looking at the next word, hi paravali. If I knew Greek, like more advanced Greek grammar a little better, I could tell you which one of these was the subject and which one was the predicate nominative based on the rules of, well, hafti is a pronoun, and hi paravali has an article, and those two things, there's like a hierarchy in Koine Greek about which one of the two words ends up being the subject and which one becomes the predicate nominative, because it means slightly different things to say I am a dog versus saying the dog is me. Those mean kind of different things. And to tell which one in the English mindset goes first and which one goes second, you don't pay attention to the word order in Greek, you pay attention to some other grammatical markings. And that's kind of more advanced Greek, but pretty sure here that it's going to be hafti, he pedavili. Actually, I know it is because we know the context because we read it in English. And hafti, in this case, he's saying this one. Yeah, this, but this is the parable, basically. So if we were to switch the word order to the English mindset, he pedavili is like working like this. Sorry, we should start with the word the, because in English we say but this is the parable. So the he pedavili estin hafti. But the this is hafti is estin the parable he pedavili. But in English, but in Greek, that's not the actual word order you should use. You should use the word order that Luke used right here. So the word order is estin de hafti hyperveli. And but the concept is this is the parable. And the last two words that we didn't go over here yet are he and perveli. You'll see that the conjugations match. All of them happen to match in this case because it's a construction, like a be construction, to be, that type of construction. And the article has to match the noun that it's describing. And articles, if you're not familiar with that term, we have 3 of them in English: a, and the. Fun fact, Russian has 0, so they don't use them. But in English we have 3. We have a, and the, and they don't conjugate ever. In Greek, they have, you could say 1. It would be the equivalent of the word the. Context kind of tells you. There's some other nuances that tell you really whether. No, that's fair enough. It's equivalent to the word the, but it conjugates. So there's many forms of it. This is the feminine, nominative feminine singular form he. Down here is the masculine nominative masculine singular form ha. So yeah, the. And then the last word, pervali, is parable, which happens to kind of sound pretty similar in English. I would venture to guess that our word probably comes from the Greek word, since they sound similar. So, and Greek is an old language. And then you'll see punctuation right here. Fun fact, since we're doing kind of a Bible study here, the punctuation was added later. Actually, so these funny little marks here, which is why typing in Greek, Koine Greek especially, is so difficult on a keyboard, is because making these little marks is not very easy. The little tiny marks that are all over the place. Those are actually not in the ancient manuscripts. Those are marks that were added later for pronunciation purposes. And so those are not actually in the ancient manuscripts. Actually, the spaces between the letters are not in ancient manuscripts. In the ancient manuscripts, they smashed all of the letters together when they wrote sentences. So they didn't divide up the words. You have to divide up the words yourself by looking at the letters. And another fun fact is the punctuation marks are not there in the original ancient manuscripts. Those were also added later, of course, because it makes it easier to read. But they're not always perfect. There may be some disagreement about where they should be, but generally you can tell where they're supposed to be. And the other thing is the capitalization is also not there. They had capital letters and lowercase letters, but the entire manuscript would be in capital letters, or the entire manuscript would be in lowercase letters. They didn't capitalize the way that we do in modern times. So there's a little bit of fun stuff about that. Now we're moving on to our next clause here. And this funny little mark is the equivalent of a semicolon in English punctuation. That's basically a semicolon. So our next clause starts with ha, which is an article. It's nominative masculine singular. It's an article. really good chance that it's going to be followed by a noun that is nominative masculine singular. And if the noun is not immediately after it, it may be one or two words later, because they can separate their words by short gaps and still recognize that they're supposed to go together. In English, this was really weird for me when I first started studying, because we don't do that. Like, our words, they're beside each other, they go together. If they're not beside each other, they don't go together. That's kind of like, it works more that way. Well, that's not true in Greek. But here, our next word is sporas, and that is actually the noun that goes with this article, and so it was right next to it. It happened to be the next word, which was convenient. Occasionally, articles cannot be followed by a noun, but that's more of an advanced grammar concept, and it's pretty tricky, and I can't adequately explain it off the top of my head anyway. So in this case, we're followed by a noun. The root form, well, the nominative form, nominative masculine singular, is the root form for a noun. Sorry, nominative singular. The masculine, feminine, that usually doesn't change for a noun. A noun will always be either masculine or always feminine or always neuter. But the articles, adjectives, and participles take the gender of the head noun. So yeah, sporas. So we have the seed for our concept here. So in our new clause beginning it, we have hasporas. And next we come to a verb, which is good. Clauses should have verbs. Unless you're speaking Russian, they don't. But in English, we have them. Most of the time, they have them in Russian too. There's just sometimes they don't. In English, they really, really almost always have them, and it wouldn't be considered good writing style anyway if you didn't have them. Maybe in speech, regular everyday speech, you might not have a verb sometimes, I think, but generally it's considered that a clause has a verb. It's like a must. In English, it has a subject and a verb, so a noun that is acting as some noun or something that's acting as the subject of the verb and a verb. In Greek, it at least has to have a verb. The subject is actually often left out of Greek. I know this is true in modern Greek, and I'm pretty sure this is true in Koine Greek as well. The subject is actually often left off because it doesn't need one, because it can be assumed that the pronoun that form of the verb would naturally take is acting as a subject, so it can be left out a lot. But it does have to have a verb. Yeah, so estin is our verb, which is the same verb we had in the beginning, so we know it is present indicative third person singular. It's from the word Imme. It means to be. So we have hasporos estin. So the seed is. Okay, good. So that's conceptually we can understand that. That makes sense. The seed is. Now the seed is what? What's next? Ha logos. I'm not going to go over the articles every time. Just know that they're there. No need to go over them every time. It works the same way every time, pretty much. So logos. Once again, this is nominative masculine singular, and that is the root form logos, and it means word. And here, the thing that from the best of my memory of the grammar details, it should be, I mean, conceptually it makes sense. It's I kind of know what the passage is supposed to say. I know conceptually it only makes sense if I understand it one way versus the other way. It doesn't make sense to say the word is the seed, right? That doesn't even make any sense. What word? The thing he was already talking about was the seed, because in the parable that I didn't actually read, the parable prior to this, he talks about a seed. So in this case, he's saying the seed is the word of God, which I didn't finish the noun phrase that I had started. Logos tou theou. So tou theou is of God. So and there you have your genitive, theou, genitive masculine singular. It's acting as a possession, which is the primary, probably the base, easiest way to think of genitive. There's many, many other uses, and actually for that I highly recommend, this was the book we used for all my Greek classes, and I went and bought a second copy. I like it a lot. There's a smaller version that's not quite so thick, that has less examples but the same basic content. This is full of actual examples. So Greek Grammar Beyond the Basics by Wallace. So he lists many, many different potential uses of the genitive case. It gets really nuanced. It gets really heavy into the grammar. But if you're just trying to read it and get a basic understanding, you want to just, your starting point should probably be the genitive typically means possession. When you get into the deeper stuff, unless you're going for your PhD in Greek, you're going to have to refer to a book like his anyway and wrestle with what he says that it means, because it would take just a really, really long time to do actual detailed studies of the number of the many times a genitive case appears and what does it mean in this case, in this appearance of the word, versus what does it mean in this appearance of the word, and anyway, breaking all that down. So plus probably you should be looking at the historical grammatical writings that are ancient to see what the ancients had to say about their own language, since they would know best, since they were the ones that were fluent in their language. So anyway, yeah, the starting point is possession. So here, ha logos tu theu is working as the predicate nominative. If you want to be a little more technical, I would say ha logos is working as the predicate nominative, and tu theu is working as a possessive. So maybe I guess you could say possessive noun phrase, modifying ha logos. Whether I'm describing it correctly with my terms, I think the point is clear, the concept is clear. The seed is the word of God. So he's describing the parable that he just talked about, which is exactly what it said if you were to read it in English. You're not getting anything new by reading this particular passage in Greek. Most of the time that's the case, but anyway, I think it's good to be able to read it in Greek, and it's fun, and I like it, and hope somebody else likes it too and will want to watch my videos. So estin de hafti hi parvali. So this is the parable, and unless I missed something, that should be a literal translation, but if we were to read the whole context, and I kind of am already familiar with the context, it should be he means like this is the meaning of the parable, but it says this is the parable, so like the literal word for word. So estin de hafti hi parvali, asporos estin ha logos tu theu. So the seed is the word of God. Very simple, very basic sentence. We finished the first sentence. Now I want to move on to, we're actually probably only going to go over the first two sentences. So if you feel like this is like taking forever, we're just going to go over probably the first two sentences. I made some notes on the side about the first sentence. So this is a really helpful way to break things down. Grammatically, what's going on here is we have a verb, a conjunction that connects it to the preceding clause, which we never actually read, the subject of the verb, and then a predicate nominative of the verb. Conceptually, I think it helps to build these kinds of things. Another thought that I had prior to recording this that I didn't say in the beginning, which would have fit better in the beginning, but I'll say it now, is that so this is intended to be a study of a dead language. It's typically not best to study a living language this way. You could, but the way that we're studying is not all that productive for being able to try to produce the language or to be able to think in the language, which are generally the goals of studying a modern language. When studying a dead language, typically that's not the goal. And when you're studying Koine Greek, pretty much always the goal is just to be able to understand what the Bible says in Greek. And you can get some reading comprehension ability without going through this. This is a faster way to get to that end result. Also, ideally, doing a little bit of production is nice, but you want to do just a little bit of production, a lot of reading, and a fair amount of analysis. If your goal is production, so a modern living language, you want to be able to actually use the language, you should do, again, most of it should be comprehension according to my favorite linguistic theories. Most of it should be comprehensible input. That's Krashen. There's a plug for Krashen. But probably a very small amount of it should be analysis. A lot of people say no analysis. I don't think that's true, but I still think some, but very small. Production then should be a much higher amount. So probably not. This also is heavily debated by different people. I'm just going to speak from my own experience. Definitely say like 60% comprehensible input, 30% production, 10% detailed analysis, right? that would be my ideal breakdown for a study of a modern language. For a dead language, especially if your dead language is just to comprehend the material and you want to comprehend it in a deep way, not like, say, when a 5-year-old native English speaker in modern times picks up the King James Bible and tries to understand it, where they're going to get almost no words out of it if they haven't been raised to already try to understand that type of language. If you if you don't want that type of understanding, then you're going to have to spend a lot of time on analysis. So reading should still be first, which often isn't in a study program, but it should be. So say, I don't know, maybe 50% reading, maybe 60%, maybe just flip them. 60% reading, 30% analysis, and then only 10% production, right? You only need a very small amount. So there's a little plug for that. But this what we're doing is analysis. Estin is the verb. The is a conjunction that goes with the previous clause. Hafti is the subject of the verb estin. So hafti estin has the meaning, conveys the meaning of this is. Hafti estin hi parvali has the meaning of this is a parable, or the parable. I should say the parable. Hi parvali, the parable. The in front of it has the concept of like either and this is the parable, or but this is the parable. Depending on context, we'll let you know which one of those two English concepts is intended. So estin de hafti hi parvali. Let's see. If we were to try to like change it up a little bit, unfortunately the amount of Greek vocabulary that I can come up with off the fly is really minimal. But let's say that we would say estin de anthropos hi parvali. That means but well, I think you should say ha anthropos. So let me say it that way. Estin de ha anthropos hi parvali means but the man is the parable, right? It's a little bit nonsense, but grammatically that's how you would produce that sentence. So estin de hafti hi parvali means but this is the parable. Estin de ha anthropos hi parvali means but the man is the parable. Or what's another noun that I know? So how about I could say, okay, so this is true if this is speaking about Jesus. I'm not making any blasphemy here, but you could say estin de ha anthropos ha theos. So, but this man is God, right? But this man is God. Estin de ha anthropos ha theos. Estin de ha anthropos ha theos. I don't normally try to do this. So that means but this man is God. Right, so you kind of see like you can also change the word order. So in Koine Greek, you could have said, I'm going to leave the conjunction out, just it's going to be simpler. Right now, if I just take the conjunction out, we have estin hafti hi parvali, which means this is the parable. But you could also say hafti estin hi parvali, which means this is the parable, and that's following English word order. So in Greek, the word order can change. And when you change it, if you're actually producing, this is where studying Russian really helped me a lot, because Russian's also very free in the word order, and I know enough from what I've heard from grammar books or from professors, and that what I know of Russian in this regard, at least is comparable to in Greek. I can't say like to what extent they're the same in this regard, but at least it's so free word order does not mean completely free word order, which is what I thought when I first started studying, that you just throw out the words in whatever order you feel like it. There's different reasons for when you choose to throw out the words in one order versus another order. And there's often, this is true in Russian, and I think this is true in Greek, although I can't say with complete certainty, there's often a sort of a base word order that you would normally put things in, unless you want to change things for a certain reason that has something to do with context or some kind of nuance or something like that. So yeah, that is true in Russian, and I think that's probably true in Greek, although I'm not sure of the various reasons for why they choose the different word orders that they choose. So yeah, there's some more Greek grammar stuff. The next sentence that we already went over, hasporos estin halogos tu theu, and we already went over that. The subject of the sentence, now thinking on a clause level or on a sentence level, is hasporos. That's acting as the subject. Those words meant the seed. Hasporos. It's the subject. It's the subject of what? There should be a verb coming next, right? Most likely there's a verb coming next or coming soon. Hasporos estin. Estin is the verb. So the subject, hasporos, meaning the seed. The verb estin, meaning is. So, okay, the seed is. That doesn't really mean much in English. You'd almost never use that. There's maybe like a very rare situation where you could even say those words and have it as an actual sentence. And maybe potentially there is no circumstance where you could say those words and it would be a sentence, right? It needs to have something after it. In this case, this is true. This is true in this case. So we do have something after it. I'm not sure if that's actually true in Greek because perhaps estin can convey the idea of exists. I'm not actually sure. But in English, we don't usually do that. It would definitely be a very, very rare, weird kind of thing to do. So normally it should have something coming after it. So hasporos estin what? Halogos tu theu, the word of God. It's telling us the seed is the word of God. Hasporos estin halogos tu theu. And yeah, and it, let's see. And so if you fit these together in an even broader conceptually level, which you wouldn't be able to fully do without either reading the passage, usually reading it in English first, because as I've already shown, these things take forever, or at least say if you were to start at the beginning of the book of Luke in Greek and work your way from beginning to end, then we would have already worked through the preceding passage in Greek and we would be able to build off of that. Or you can actually do that part of it in English and you're not usually going to be missing anything. It'd be a rare moment that you would be missing something, because usually when you read, you don't walk away remembering the words anyway. You walk away remembering the concepts. So, yeah. So conceptually what we have going on here is there was a parable that was given. And after this parable, Jesus is going to attempt to explain this parable to his audience. And he starts off by saying, Estin de hafti hi paravali. He starts off by saying, but this is the parable. And after he says those words, he's about to go on with some different explanations about the parable. Some details about, such and such thing in the parable meant such and such thing. Such and such other thing in the parable meant such and such thing. So this is his first one. He says, hasporos. What sporos is he talking about? Ha means the. It's a little different in Greek because they use the definite article in many, many places that we do not in English. But in this case, it does convey the same idea as in English. He is referring to a previous sporos, seed, concept that was presented somewhere previous in the text when he went over the parable. And so we would, if we saw this, we could say, hasporos estin. The seed is. What seed? What seed is? And then the answer is the seed that he talked about in the parable, which we didn't read once again, but I told you where we're at. So if you want to go back and read the preceding verses to see what parable, that's where you would find the answer to this question. Hasporos, what sporos? And estin, again, you're wondering what? The seed is what? The seed that he talked about in the preceding section is what? Halogos tu theu. And then that concept, of course, is filled with many different ideas throughout the Bible to know what he means by the Word of God. All right, what else did I have over here? I kind of went over that already. Let me see. Yeah, so one more little grammatical aside here, and then we can move on to the next verse. Oh, I have to zoom out some or you won't be able to read that. So these are the different, when you study Greek, these are the different parts of speech that you need to know. So the way that language works is language builds different concepts into the main core building block of speech is the clause and then the second, like its best friend, is the phrase. Those are the two things that all speech, any language is built out of. And clauses and phrases are built out of these words that I have listed here. There may be some types that I missed. This is definitely most of them, if not all of them. And these are going to be the ones that are relevant to a Greek study. Yeah. So then, of course, you do go up a level from that. It doesn't stop with clauses and phrases. Sentences are built out of clauses and phrases. But then sentences are, of course, then organized into broader concepts, which as you go up in levels, it gets much more abstract about where you draw divisions and how you divide things. But they are definitely divided into different things, whether a discourse or a style of writing or whatever. So as for now, at this level, the building blocks that we're going to be dealing with, they would be pronouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, articles, participles, interjections, participles. Did I say that twice? Particles and participles. No, two different words. And prepositions. And to just give an brief idea about what they are, both some English words and some Greek words, even though if this is your first time studying Greek, you won't know those words. But here's some Greek examples. They should be pretty familiar words because actually most of them I tried to pick from the passage that we were just looking at. And the couple that I didn't, I picked because, well, actually I kind of remembered them. So, if you study for a little bit, there'll be words that stand out because they come up a lot or whatever. Maybe they stand out. So pronoun, in English, some examples of pronouns are I, she, it, herself, himself. They're nouns that refer to other nouns that are not being used at the moment. They're serving in place of other nouns. And those are pronouns. And in Greek, just two examples are ego and avtos. Ego is the first person singular pronoun. I don't know if you say personal or singular. First person personal singular pronoun is probably a better way to say it. What's probably more meaningful to you is it's the word I. It means I, ego. Avtos would be third person singular. I just said that the third person singular masculine personal pronoun. So avtos, and again conceptually it's he. Avtos, he. So verbs. Verbs are next. Clauses are built out of verbs. Those are kind of the hinge pin for every clause is the verb. Most of the other things that happen in a clause happen because of the verb that was chosen for that clause. Verbs are the primary meaning bearers for a clause. I'm very convinced of that. And grammatically, the grammatical decisions that are decided on for a clause tend to revolve around the verb that's going in that clause. So, and at least in English, and this is for the most part true in other languages, clauses have to have verbs. That's like a verb is a clause. A verb is a clause. It's typically one verb to one clause. That's most of the time. That's the way it goes. Not always, but it's most of the time. So verb or verb phrase, if you want to say like in English, I was eating. So was eating, it's two words. I don't know. It's one verb phrase. I think technically one is counting as the verb. It would be was. And then eating is another part of speech, and my English grammar is actually not as good as my Greek grammar, so I don't know the name for certain. But yeah, so verb. So in English, some examples: run, jump, sit, eat. As most people know from elementary school grammar, those verbs are typically the thing that the doing, the thing that happens, typically. The other thing is that they're stative. It's expressing the idea that something is. So Imme, the verb to be. Akuo, it would be well, in English we would say to hear, but as I mentioned, if we were giving the root form in English, we would say to hear, but in Greek they don't give the infinitive form, so actually akuo expresses the idea of I hear because they give the first person singular, so I hear or I am hearing. It has either connotation. Next set of words that you would need to know are adjectives. In English, and some examples: tall, smelly, old, An example in Greek is kalos, which does appear in our text, just not what we went over yet, and that's actually something that we're not going to end up going over because it was a couple verses later, but I did read it when I was reading. Examples of adverbs, I had to look these up. I had a hard time with this. I know what they mean, but for some reason I couldn't think of examples of adverbs that I was completely sure were adverbs other than quickly. I came up with that one, but some other examples I found from lists on the internet. Finally, later. To me, adverbs is kind of a tricky category. I don't know if it's just me or if other people think so too, but an example from Greek is ita, and I actually forget what that means. So, but that is an adverb in Greek. I think it's actually in I think it was in the text. I didn't write it down. There's kalos. That was the one I said as an adjective. I don't remember what ita means. Anyway, apparently that's an adverb. I looked it up. So next we would have articles, which I said in English we have three: the, a, and an. In Greek, they kind of only have one. It's the equivalent of the, but we often, conceptually, we try to break it down into three: the masculine form, the feminine form, and the neuter form, but it's just, all of them express the idea of the. It's just different conjugations for the same word. Whether you want to break it into one word with ha being the root word, or whether you want to break it in three with the masculine, feminine, and neuter forms being each their own root, ha, he, and to, that's a matter of preference, but here I wrote all three. Another form of speech that you'll see in Greek commonly is a particle, and these are really hard to describe. I know some of them, but I just got this definition from Wikipedia, and you can't see all of it because it was long, but particles are short words that, with just one or two exceptions, are all prepositions. I don't think that's true. I don't know if that's true in Greek, but apparently that's true in English. Are prepositions unaccompanied by any complement of their own. There's nothing else after that. Some of the most common prepositions belong to the particle category. So these are something they list as particles in English: along, away, back, by, down, forward, in, off, out, on, out, over, round, under, up. I'm just taking this random internet person's word for it. Obviously those are prepositions. I think he's saying depending on how they're used, if they're used without an object, so without a noun. I don't know much about that in English, but in probably actually the Greek one that I do know, the word me, which we will have in the next verse that we're about to go over. So it means not. So like, I am not a dog. That word not, probably in English, definitely in Greek, it's a particle. And in Greek, the word is me. In Greek, actually, there's two words, me and u. And I guess technically three if you want to also count ook. But ook is just a pronunciation thing, like how in English we have a and an. U and ook is like that. It just depends on what word follows it, whether you had the k or not. And then the me is a grammatical difference. So u is the word for not if the verb is, we'll just keep it this way, is a certain type of verb, and then me is the form you use if it is a different type of verb. Sometimes that could be nice to know because, as I mentioned, there can be kind of many words in between certain words in Greek that are where those words are supposed to go together. So it can be helpful to know that me can only go with certain types of verbs, whereas u goes with different types of verbs. We'll actually see that in our next verse. Another kind of word is an interjection, and I also had to look up this list, but these are words that are familiar. It was easier to look up the list and to try to come up with some. So English examples are like huh, or geez, or oops, or phew. Like they're those like words that are kind of sounds more than words. And actually, interestingly, here's one from Greek that is used in the Bible, and this one I didn't have to look up, is uai, and uai is what they translate as woe in English. I don't know why they translated it as woe. That's such like an archaic word. I wonder if there's a modern equivalent, but I guess anything you sound that's a modern equivalent is going to sound like flippant. I don't know what the connotation is actually to this word in Greek. It'd be probably interesting for someone to write a PhD on if no one's already done it. But uai is that concept of woe. So like when in the Bible they'll say like When do they say it? It's I think they say like woe because of the next plagues or bulls or trumpets or whichever things he says are about to come. Like woe. Anyway, I think everybody's familiar with hearing the word woe. It's an interjection. They kind of like sit out from the rest of the sentence. They're almost like standalone things where it's like a sound expresses a concept. So that's kind of like an interjection. So participles are really tricky. They're one of the most difficult things to try to do in Greek, and it's hard to describe them in English because I don't think we actually have them in English. I went ahead and looked it up, and Wikipedia says that we do have them in English. I had always thought there was a difference between a participle and a gerund. At any rate, we definitely don't have participles that are like the participles that are exactly like the participles in Greek. So if we do have them, they're not exactly the same. The thing that we do have is not exactly the same. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't really know all the right terms for what we have in English, but it's a thing that's similar to what's called a participle in Greek, but it's not exactly the same. So here's the examples I found from Wikipedia for English. The examples, the participle part is in bold. Basically, a participle comes from a verb. So it is a verb. Usually the verb is changed in form in a certain way. I can't see my hands. And so the form is changed in a certain way, and it can be acting in a non-verb part of speech, often as an adjective or as a noun or as an adverb, but they're built off of verbs. So some examples in English: a broken window. So the verb would be broke, but it's acting as a noun. It's describing the window. You could say a tall window, a short window, a broken window. But broken is coming from a verb. So a fallen tree, same idea, it's acting as a noun. A woman wearing a red hat, and that's similar to the idea in Greek, but that's is it right to say that's adverbal? It's kind of acting as an adverbal. Is that right? A woman, yeah, because here it's like taking the idea of who was wearing a red hat. So actually, that would still technically be a adjectival, I think. Anyway, I don't want to get onto a tangent. A woman wearing a red hat. Wearing is, according to this random YouTube thing, acting as a participle, and that does fit kind of with the Greek concept. I saw John eating his dinner. So in this case, this is adverbial. Eating is further clarifying saw. So you saw him. Well, the seeing of John. No, actually, this is still describing John. It's John eating his dinner. So the eating his dinner, that phrase is giving you more information about John. In this case, I actually don't know whether it's supposed to be giving you more information about John or more information about the scene. In Greek, though, it tends to be clearer, because the conjugations have to match up. In English, there's no conjugations really, hardly. I mean, eat changes to eating, but it's very minimal. So, yeah. And I went ahead and looked up the definition for a gerund, because I thought those were called gerunds, but they're similar. So this says a gerund is a form of a verb used as a noun, whereas a participle is a form of a verb used as an adjective or as a verb in conjunction with an auxiliary verb. Yeah. In English, the present participle has the same form as the gerund, and the difference is how they are used. So I guess I was probably misunderstanding that before. In Greek, I think both those concepts would be called participle, unless I maybe misunderstood something there. They're pretty tricky. They're pretty tricky birds. The last category that you would need to know is prepositions. A nice thing about these, so something interesting in Greek and in heavily inflected languages, also such as Russian. So in English, in, on, under, around, those are examples. And if I say in the house doesn't change form from the way you would use it as a subject the way you would use it as an object. If I was a subject, I would say, the house fell apart. There's the subject. If I were to use it as an object, I would say, I bought the house. The form doesn't change. Well, in Greek, the forms do change, as I kind of already established. They also change when they go with the preposition, but the change with the preposition is just to tell you the meaning of the preposition. So if you look up the word apo, which is the preposition I have listed there in Greek, you'll see a number of different definitions, and before each set of words, it will tell you whether those sets of definitions are supposed to go with the genitive case, whether they're supposed to go with the dative case, or whether they're supposed to go with the accusative case. The preposition cannot take a nominative case word. So that's something interesting to note about heavily inflected languages. The other thing to note is that prepositions never translate well. There's never a word-to-word correspondence. I think this is true of all languages. They're one of the hardest things to master when you're trying to learn a foreign language, because the ways that humans choose to break apart their prepositions conceptually, where this word covers this set of concepts, this word covers this set of concepts, vary just very wildly. So they don't overlap very well. So it can be very difficult to, even after a long time of study, you'll probably be looking these up. And when you try to look them up, anytime you look up a preposition, most of the time you'll see like the one preposition with the one form can take 5 different meanings. And then another form for that same preposition can take 5 other different meanings. The reason is because conceptually the overlap is not very well. There's no one-to-one correspondence, or even like a 5-to-1 correspondence. Okay. One more verse. So the next verse, verse 12 right here, says, let me scroll down. Hide para tin hadon isin hi accusantes ite ergete ha diavalas ke eri ton logon apo tis cardias afton kina mi pistefsantes sothosin. And did the same thing here, broke down the words. The first word, he, nominative masculine plural, it's an article. It means the. It's going to have another, most likely, it will have another noun going with it that is also nominative masculine plural, that will probably be nearby. The second word is not that noun. The second word is the. It's the same conjunction we had in the beginning. It can mean and or but. And it never comes as the first word in its clause. It always comes as the second word. Always the second word. It's just strange to me. I don't know why, but it must be a relatively common thing, because Greek has or Russian has a word that's the same. In Greek, they have a word that's the same. It has to be the second word in the clause. So, para. This is a preposition, and in this case, I didn't write it here when I wrote down the meanings, but I only wrote down the meanings that go with the form that we have. So this tin hadon is accusative. So when we look up para, we have to only take into account the accusative, I guess, the accusative meaning of the preposition. And as I mentioned, and as you can see, there are many possibilities. You have to use context to decide. So the word para could potentially mean beside, by, at, on, along, to, than, more than, above, rather than, or contrary to. Yeah. Tin hadon. Tin is an article. It's accusative feminine singular. Then the noun after it that goes with it, accusative feminine singular. Here, hados means either way or road. So, and actually he, at this point, I'm not exactly sure what we're doing here with that word. So I think, it's been a little while, but I think in Greek sometimes the article can stand alone for a noun, but I'm going to have to just kind of like ignore that for a minute, because I can't think of exactly grammatically what's going on here with the word he, because even as I peek ahead the next couple words, I don't see a free noun that could go with this, unless I miscopied it when I copied this verse, but I don't think so. And actually, we're up to another article that's the same nominative, masculine, plural. So the word that this article goes with could not be after this article. That would just not make any sense. It would be confusing. So we're going to skip over that conceptually for a moment. So de para. So para tin hadon means one of these meanings of the conjunction with the road. So because I kind of remember how it's translated and I remember the context of this passage, I'm going to say that it means along the road or by the road. Conceptually, there's not much difference in English between several of these. So along the road, by the road, beside the road, all kind of mean the same thing. And I'm pretty sure conceptually that's the idea that's being expressed here, just knowing the passage. So para tin hadon, so by the road. Isin, again, is a form of Imme. Earlier we had the form estin, and now we have the form isin. Estin was present indicative third person singular. Isin is present indicative third person plural. So isin. So we're saying that something is, something, well, some things are, it's plural, some things are. But so far we don't have the what are, unless it's going to be the article he by itself, which I'm not sure yet. Yeah, actually here's a comma. So it should actually be the word he. So he here is kind of working as a, almost like a pronoun. We'll go with that. If I made a mistake, please forgive me, but I want to say that it's working as almost as a pronoun, but it is an article. So it's going to be the things are. So what things are? He acusantes. So actually, instead of the things, so in English we split those up different. So I couldn't know ahead of time whether the things here, it is masculine, so it could be more like the people instead of things, but it could also be things, thinking of masculine, grammatically masculine concepts as opposed to like masculine concepts. But in this case, now that reading the next word, he acusantes. So this once again is the same article, and this article goes with this participle, which I'll get back to that in a minute. But acusantes basically means the ones who are listening. So that's like the verb. Actually, so I guess in English, if this were English, this would be a gerund if I understood the Wikipedia article correctly. But in Greek, this is just a participle. The verb is acting as a noun here. The verb is turned into a noun. It's not just a verb acting as a noun. Grammatically, it's changed and basically turned into something that can be used as a noun. So so this has the idea of, if we just go with some of the words here, just to get the idea across without getting the whole phrase yet, the whole clause. He isin, he acusantes. It means like those who are hearing. Those who are hearing, right? Let's say that. Unless it's aorist, so it should be those who heard. So he here has the idea of the ones who, which actually makes me wonder if I was correct that it's the article as opposed to the type of pronoun that I can't think of the exact word for, but I did look it up. Unless I made a mistake, we'll still go with the fact that it's the article, but conceptually what it's expressing is the idea of the ones who. So, or like they. Yeah, we'll just say they. They. So they, not really like a fair, you wouldn't translate it that way, but conceptually it's getting that idea across. They are isin, he isin. And then once again, so you have the subject, you have the verb, you need a predicate nominative. He isin, he acusantes. So they are the ones who heard. He isin, he acusantes. And then if I throw in the words that I skipped over, because this would have been a sometimes, so there's independent clauses, dependent clauses, and I don't know if it's actually correct verbiage to say independent phrases and dependent phrases, but I'm going to use that terminology. So currently right here, this is all dependent. Paratin hadon. And what I'm trying to express by that is that you can take those words out and you have not changed. So you've changed the meaning of the clause, but you've changed the meaning of the clause in such a way that it refers to the same thing, just does not give as much information. So hiisin hiakusantes expresses the idea of the ones who heard. Why is this present? You know what? Grammatically, there's something I'm mixing up here, but it's close to the idea. I apologize. There's a little bit of a grammatical thing that I know that I don't have correct here because this is present. They are the ones who heard. That's more of what's going on. So hiisin, they are, hiakusantes, the ones who heard. That's what's going on. And this is not just working as a noun. This is working more like the way that I thought participles worked. It's working as, I think you'd say, as an adjectival participle. It's been a long time since I studied that, and this is very advanced grammar that you don't really think about when you just try to read it in the language, unless you're at a really advanced level, which I'm not. So, but hiakusantes should be, so hiisin is they are, meaning some they that he's already talked about previously. They are, hiisin, hiakusantes, the ones who heard. Okay, and so you can leave out paratin hadon, and it's still true, and that's always the case because this phrase, these words, this phrase, just adds nuance. It doesn't like completely change, as in from one meaning to another meaning. It takes a meaning and gives more information about it, if that makes sense. So the more information that that's why you can read it and cut this out, and you still have, you're guaranteed to have a meaningful grammatical sentence versus reading it and put this in, and they're both going to be valid, but one will have more details than the other. So the details that I left out are paratin hadon, so along the road. And actually, I think it should be kide paratin hadon. But the ones kide paratin hadon. I should have looked at this a little bit better first. Yeah, I didn't get much better over there either. So, but the ones who are along the road are, that's probably a better way to say it. Yeah. So maybe it's not, maybe it is actually necessary for the meaning of the sentence. Anyway, it was still grammatical to take it out, but I think I did change the meaning by taking it out. So, like the ones are who heard versus the ones who are along, the ones who are along the road who heard. Anyway, I'm taking way too long on this. Let me just skip and explain participle real quick. So participles, when you conjugate them, so they're like half nouns, half verbs, but they come from verbs. So they have 6 different things here. And let's see, it should be tense, voice, then participle, which will always be participle right there because it is a participle. Tense, voice, I don't know if that counts as mood. I'm going to call it mood. I think mood. Tense, voice, mood, or part of speech maybe. Then you have case, gender, number. So we have aorist, active participle. Those 3 words are like the verb half of the conjugation. Then the noun half is nominative, masculine, plural. Verbs are a little more complicated to talk about than nouns in Greek, and I think that's probably true in most languages, but it's true in Greek. And so the aorist, that's the tense. Earlier we had present. Aorist is kind of like simple past. That's the short, sweet explanation. Active, you have active, passive, and you also have a third one called middle, which can kind of be ignored for right now. Just basically the idea is active or passive. Passive usually means it's a verb that does not take a direct object, so it would be transitive and intransitive, but those are technically separate designations. But just to get like a general taste of it across. And once again, though, it does have noun conjugating pieces of it, so those must match up with any other noun conjugating pieces that are necessary. And the case is once again determined by whatever verb it might be going with. That's just a regular verb that it's going with. So yeah, we'll move on. I spent too much time on that. So ita is an adverb, which I did have over there, and I said I forgot the meaning. That's because it was right here. That's where I got it from. So ita means then. So then erkete. So here's a verb. Present passive indicative third person singular. The root form is erkeme, and it means to come, or technically it means I am coming. And erkete is present passive indicative third person singular. So it means he is coming. The indicative part kind of just means that it's making a statement. It's more helpful to know what the other forms are, because indicative is just like the normal type form. The first idea that would typically come into your mind is the indicative form. The other forms are all special cases. Passive is not active, and in this case, it's letting you know that, well, it means two things. Grammatically, it's passive because the form of it is following the conjugation that is passive, but also conceptually, it means that it does not take an object. So, I am coming dog. You can't say that. It can't take an object. That's true in English for this word, and it's true in Greek. But those are not always the same. Sometimes words can be transitive and intransitive in one language, and then not the same in the other language, the opposite in the other language. Transitive and intransitive is another way of saying whether it can take an object or not, a direct object. And the passive idea kind of means that, but kind of not. It's kind of referring to the conjugation of it. But that's the helpful way to think about it right here. Ha diavolas. Once again, ha is an article. Diavolas is a nominative masculine singular noun, meaning devil. So in this case, it is the subject, because erketai, as we know, it's passive. It can't take an object, and your object can't be in the nominative form unless that object is a predicate nominative, which erketai can't take a predicate nominative. It's not a be verb, like a being verb, a to be, that type of concept. There's only a couple of them in Greek, and the only one I remember is Imme. There's another one or two, and I can't even remember them because they're not nearly as common. So this has to be the subject of the verb. So erkete ha diavolas means ha diavolas erkete, or the devil came, is coming. It should be comes, is coming. Comes, actually, I think would be better here, just because my English memory, that's how they translate it. But conceptually, it's going to fit better, because you could say then the devil is coming, but we know that we know by the word then that it should be after, and in English that doesn't really work very well. In Greek it works well, but in English it doesn't, so it's better to say comes. But at any rate, erkete ha diavolas. Then we have a conjunction, ke, which means that we're going to be able to combine two clauses. Ke means and that means we're going to tack on a second verb. That's often the case. It's not always the case, as you will know, because ke works the same as and does in English. And in this case, our next verb that we're going to do, which should probably end up having the same subject. I don't think it's a guarantee, but it's most likely going to have the same subject, ha diavolas. So he comes, ke, meaning and, something else happens, heiri is the word, and it comes from, the root form is hero, meaning take up, take away, If you're familiar with the passage, you know that takes would probably be the best translation there. So heiri, present, active, indicative, third person singular. Pretty much the same stuff that we've already said, but it's third person singular, so that should match with the other parts of speech that are going with it, which we saw, hadiavalos, masculine singular. So third person means it can take a noun, which hadiavalos is a noun. Singular means that whatever nouns it takes should be singular. So hadiavalos is singular. So hadiavalos does two things here. He ergete, he comes, and a, is it hey or a? Those are really tiny, little tiny mark. 80, and he takes. Since he takes, he might take something, right? I mean, that actually is the type of verb that has to have an object. You can't just say he comes and he takes. He takes what? He has to take something. That's true in English, and I think that's probably true in Greek as well with a word. Ton logon. So here this is accusative. This is the direct object of our verb. This ton logon is the direct object of eri. And so this is the thing that he takes. Hadiavalas eri ton logon. The devil takes the word. Hadiavalas eri ton logon. I'm going to try to speed it up a little bit. How long is this? Yeah. So next we have a prepositional phrase. This is going to be just, again, this is a little easier because I know from the context, but you'd have to discern from the context what's going on with this preposition. I just happen to already know that this preposition is going to be dealing with the word eri. It's going to be giving us more information about eri. So he takes. We know who takes it. We know what is taken. Well, this is going to tell us some information about where. Apotis kardias, which means from the heart. Once again, apo is a preposition, so it's going to be followed by a noun that is in a certain case, and the case will help you determine the meaning of the preposition. So apo, when it is used with the genitive, could potentially mean from, away from, or by means of, and you have to decide based on context which one of those concepts it is conveying. In this case, from makes a lot of sense. From the hearts. This is from the heart, sorry, this is singular. Tis kardias. And afton was him. The him here, and this is plural, so them. The them, afton, is probably going back up to he, the word that I had some troubles trying to convey. So back to the beginning of the clause, we just have, so from here down to here, ite ergete ha diavolas ke eri ton logon apotis kardias afton. So then ite, he came, ergete, this is the subject, so the devil came, ha diavolas ergete, but you switch the word over in Greek. Ke, we're going to add some more information. Eri, takes, so not only did he come, but he also took. Eri. Afton logon, this is what he took, ton logon. Apotis kardias, afton, from the hearts, so yeah, what he took, ton logon, apotis kardias, afton, letting you know some information about where it was taken from. The last little bit that we're going to cover here from the verse, Imme pistefsantes lothosin. So hina is a conjunction that means it can mean either in order that or so that, depending on context as to which kind of idea you want to express. Hina, in order that, and me is a word, is a particle. It conveys the idea of not, and it's only used with I think the correct terminology is oblique cases. Basically, it's not used with verbs in the indicative case. If it were supposed to go with a verb in the indicative case, then it would be the word u instead of the word me. So, skipping ahead, I happen to know from looking at this already, the word that it's going with is sotosin. Sotosin means to save. So, in order not to save, me sotosin, this is passive, so It has the idea of be. Actually, that's a good way to express passive versus active. So I save versus I am saved. So I am saved, that's a passive concept. I save, that's an active concept. Active concepts can often take direct objects. Passive concepts don't take direct objects because the subject is often the thing being acted on. So I am saved, the saving is being acted on upon me, but you don't know who is doing the saving. And this is true in Greek. The passive, yeah. So then the active would be I save. So you have to know like who is doing the saving, but maybe you don't know what the saving is done to, unless I add a direct object. And in the passive, you can know who is doing the saving. So I am saved, but you have to add other forms, like I am saved by Jesus. The by Jesus tells you who is doing the saving. And in that case, you use a prepositional phrase as opposed to just a noun that is acting as a direct object or a subject. The same thing is true with active and passive in Greek. And the word that I skipped over, pistefsantes, is another participle. It's from the verb pistefo. It means to believe or to believe in, to have faith or to have faith in. And I'm pretty sure it's fair to also say to trust or to trust in, which is actually what I prefer as a translation personally. But mi pistefsantes sotosin. So hina mi pistefsantes sotosin. So in order that mi goes with sotosin. So I'm actually going to skip over that word for a second. Pistefsantes. So here the idea is the ones who believe, and then mi sothosin may not be saved, right? So in order that the ones who believe may not be saved. Ina mi pistefsantes sothosin. In English, it doesn't make a lot of sense to say in order that not the ones who believe are saved. We really have to have the word not with the verb that it goes with. And in Greek, that's not the case. As you can see clearly right here, they can put a word in between there and it's fine. You do notice that this word, I don't know for sure if this can take the word not, present active participle. Maybe if that takes the word oo for not, if it can just not take the word oo or me, I'm not sure, but somehow it would be clear to the listener. Maybe it's just context tells them, because it doesn't make much sense to say in the broader context to say that in order that the ones who don't believe are saved. But I'm not really sure. I just happen to know grammatically. I'm not sure why, but I happen to know that in this case that the not has to go with sothosin, me has to go with sothosin. So one more little part over here, almost done. So the little bit more random grammar study. So as I mentioned a little bit, speech, communication, writing, all that stuff is built mostly off of phrases and clauses. What is a phrase? A phrase, I can't remember. Some of these I might have come up with. Some of them I looked up off of Wikipedia. But a phrase is a small group of words standing together as a conceptual unit. Typically, they're forming a component of a clause. Actually, I'm pretty sure I got all these from like Wikipedia and other random, just easily Googled internet sites. So that's what a phrase is. Small group of words, they stand together as a conceptual unit. Typically, they form a component of a clause. There's different types of phrases. You have noun phrases, prepositional phrases, verb phrases. The best idea is to try to recognize them when you see them. Maybe you won't always be correct, but you'll get a pretty good sense of it, and you'll just, the more you try, the more you'll get better at it. They're used in all languages. All languages are built out of phrases. The next one is a clause. A clause is a unit of grammatical organization below the sentence in rank and in traditional grammar said to consist of a subject and a predicate, otherwise known as a subject and a verb. So you always have to have, or at least almost always, I'm going to say always, but it may not be like always, have to have a subject and a verb. The predicate just means the verb and the stuff after the verb as opposed to just meaning verb. And there's two types of clauses, independent clause, a dependent clause. I sort of started to talk about this, just kind of reading real quick the Wikipedia definition. An independent clause is a group of words that contains a subject and verb and expresses a complete thought. So that's what an independent clause is. An independent clause can stand alone. What is a dependent clause? A dependent clause is a group of words with a subject and a verb. It does not express a complete thought, so it is not a sentence and can't stand alone. These clauses include adverb clauses, adjective clauses, and noun clauses. I couldn't actually give you examples of all three of those if I tried, but there's kind of a rough idea of the difference. And I just went ahead and tried to produce real quickly some very, very simple clauses in Greek. So Luke's clauses are very complicated to the point that I was getting word salad when I was trying to translate this into English, and I mostly understand what it means, but when I try to pin down the exact precise meaning of the word that's being used, I had a little bit of troubles, right? So the main reason for that is grammatically the type of clause structure that's being used here is just pretty complicated and outside of where I'm really comfortable with dealing with. Whereas some of the other ones were really simple, and these examples I'm going to give right here that I made up myself are very simple because my ability to produce them myself is much less than my ability to read them. So these clauses are forming a simple format of subject, verb, object. You could build a clause into many different types of formats and then fill them in with many different other specific words. This is just the two clauses that I chose to build. The one is hatheos erchete, which I mistyped that because I forgot the accent mark, which is always required in Greek. Greek always writes with an accent mark, so it's kind of nice when you're just reading it because you never have to guess where the accent is. Even modern Greek is like that. They always include the accent mark. Actually, as I mentioned earlier, ancient Greek wasn't like that because when it was originally written, they didn't use the accent marks. But whenever you look at it in modern times, the accent marks have been added over the centuries by whoever, I don't even know, some monk somewhere probably. So hatheos erchete means God is coming. Yes, erchete should be, it's present, so is coming. And this was a passive verb, as we saw, because we just saw this verb a second ago. So yeah, and then there's no object here. It's very simple. You have subject, verb. Hatheos erchete. You could build other types of verbs. You could change the subject. Haentorpas erchete. The man is coming. The modern Greek form is yineka, hi yineka erchete. The woman is coming, but I actually think there's a different word for a woman in ancient Greek. I can't remember for sure now whether that's ancient or modern Greek. Yeah, maybe that was the modern Greek. Maybe I just forgot. Maybe that was ancient Greek. Maybe I just forgot modern Greek word for woman. So another example would be hatheos akui haftan. Hatheos akui haftan means God hears him, right? So hatheos akui haftan. Another so another one that you could come up with is I think you could say hatheos akui, which has the idea of God is listening, because God is hearing. We don't usually use, I think you can say that in English, but it's not that common to use hearing without an object. So God is listening. I think that's a fair translation. You could say, we just saw the word hadiavalas, meaning the devil. Hadiavalas akui afton. So the devil is listening to him, and you'll notice that the object has to be conjugated. So afton is the accusative form. If I wanted to switch these two words, and instead of saying, so hatheos akui afton, sorry, I'm used to pronouncing that wrong. Hatheos akui haftan means God is listening to him. Or God is hearing him. Actually, sorry, God is hearing him. If I want to say he is hearing God, I have to say haftas akui ton theon. So haftas akui ton theon. Now that means he is hearing God. I changed the forms of the words. So hatheos, if it's the subject, if God is the subject, or haftas, then you notice the as at the end. That's actually what signifies the conjugation. That's what signifies the case. If he is the subject. Akui I didn't change. You could change that in many different ways too, but I didn't. Then the last word there, haftan, meaning him. Here's him, or if I want to say here's God, you say tonteon. Haftan, tonteon. That's the accusative masculine form versus hatheos or haftas. That's the accusative, the nominative masculine form. So anyway, there's just kind of a little study looking at a couple verses, kind of looking at a small passage, then looking at a couple verses, and then just talking about grammar and meaning. And yeah, that ended up pretty long actually.